Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey, not to the grand battlefields or the opulent palaces of Imperial China, but into the quiet, often terrifying, world of its scholars. Imagine this: the oil lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the worn pages of a Confucian classic. Your back aches from hours hunched over a desk, your eyes burn, and your mind is a swirling fog of ancient texts and intricate commentaries. Outside, the world is hushed, but inside your cramped study, the pressure is immense, a silent, relentless force that has defined your entire life. This isn't just about passing a test, it's about a brutal, lifelong pursuit that promised immense power, but delivered crushing disappointment to millions. You probably won't survive this without losing your sanity, or at least your eyesight. But we're going to dive into how the Imperial Chinese Examination System was truly brutal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Imperial China, perhaps during the Tang, Song, Ming, or Qing dynasties, periods when the civil service examination system, or Keju Kochu, was the primary pathway to officialdom. This wasn't a modern job interview. It was a colossal, grueling, and fiercely competitive system designed to select the most talented individuals, theoretically, from across the vast empire to serve as government officials. It promised meritocracy, the idea that anyone, regardless of birth, could rise to the highest levels of power through their intellectual ability. But the reality was far more complex, brutal, and often heartbreaking. The allure was undeniable. Success in the examinations meant immense prestige, power, wealth, and status, not just for you, but for your entire family, elevating your lineage for generations. It meant escaping the grueling life of a peasant or artisan. Remember those awful jobs in ancient Rome, or why building a castle sucked. The jobs in China were equally tough. It was the ultimate social ladder, a seemingly open door to the elite. But this door was incredibly narrow, guarded by decades of relentless study, immense pressure, and a brutal success rate that left millions in the dust. Your life, from early childhood, is dedicated to this pursuit. While common folk toiled in the fields or workshops, you are immersed in the ancient classics, memorizing vast texts, composing intricate essays, and mastering the complex calligraphy. Your days are long, your studies isolating, and the pressure from your family, who have often sacrificed everything for your education, is immense. You are their hope, their investment, and their future. One mainstream historical fact that immediately shatters the myth of a simple meritocracy is that the Imperial Chinese Examination System was an extraordinarily rigorous and brutal multi-tiered process, requiring decades of intense study, immense financial investment, and enduring extreme physical and psychological stress, with staggeringly low pass rates, often less than 1%, making it a lifelong, all-consuming, and frequently crushing pursuit for millions of aspiring scholars. The path to power was paved with overwhelming failure. Think about it. A 1% pass rate would make an Ivy League acceptance look easy. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the extreme dedication and desperation of scholars is the practice of meticulously copying out entire classical texts by hand, sometimes dozens of times, to aid memorization. Some scholars even resorted to wearing special memory hats with small scrolls or notes tucked into them, or using tiny, micro-written copies of texts concealed on their bodies during exams, which we'll explore later. Imagine spending years of your life literally hand-copying textbooks until your fingers cramp, just to pass a test. Historians still argue whether the Imperial Examination System, despite its brutal competitiveness and high failure rates, genuinely fostered a meritocratic society by selecting competent and learned officials, ensuring a stable and enduring bureaucracy, or if its rigid emphasis on rote memorization and classical conformity stifled creativity, innovation, and practical governance skills, ultimately contributing to China's stagnation in later centuries. Did it create good officials or just good memorizers? As you prepare for the examinations, the air around you is thick not just with dust from old scrolls, but with the palpable anxiety of millions of scholars across the empire. The journey to the provincial capital, where the first major examinations are held, is often long and arduous. You carry your meager belongings, your inkstone, your brushes, and the immense weight of your family's hopes. The true test of your endurance, both mental and physical, is just beginning. You feel the pressure building, the years of study, the sacrifices of your family, all culminating in this terrifying, unpredictable event. The world outside the examination hall is vibrant and complex, but for you, it shrinks to the confines of classical texts and the silent, grinding pursuit of knowledge. And you're about to discover just how profoundly brutal this system was, transforming scholars into automatons and ambitions into dust. Having been introduced to the terrifying scale and brutal stakes of the Imperial Chinese Examination System, your journey into its harsh reality begins not in an exam hall, but in your earliest childhood. Early life childhood rigor. Forget carefree play, diverse learning, or gentle encouragement. Your life as an aspiring scholar began incredibly young, consumed by an intense, isolating regimen of rote memorization, calligraphy practice, and relentless study, all under immense pressure from your family. You quickly learn that your childhood isn't for fun. It's a grim apprenticeship in endless discipline, where every waking hour is dedicated to mastering ancient texts, and any deviation is seen as a threat to your family's future. It's like being forced into a lifelong academic marathon starting at age 5, where your coaches are incredibly demanding, and your only playground is a stack of dusty books. You are a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, barely able to reach the top of your small desk, while other children in your village, if you're from a humble background, might be playing in the fields or helping with simple chores. Your days are dominated by the rhythmic drone of classical texts being recited by your tutor, or your own small voice repeating ancient phrases. Your primary tools are a brush, an inkstone, a stick of ink, and countless sheets of paper or bamboo slips. The air in your study is often quiet, punctuated only by the scratching of brushes and the rustle of scrolls. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern notions of early childhood is that boys destined for the Imperial Examination System began their rigorous and highly specialized education at a very young age, often 4 to 7 years old. Focusing almost exclusively on memorizing Confucian classics, mastering calligraphy, and composing essays, a demanding regimen that consumed their childhoods and isolated them from broader experiences. This early's intense focus was deemed essential to build the foundational knowledge required for later stages of the exams. Think about it. Your kindergarten curriculum involves memorizing thousands of ancient poems. Imagine the sheer volume of text you're expected to memorize. You start with the 3-character classic, San Zi Jing, then move to the 1,000-character classic, Qianziwen, and then the foundational 4 books, Sishu, the Analects of Confucius, Mencius, Great Learning, and Doctrine of the Mean. These are not just read, they are committed to memory, verbatim, hundreds of thousands of characters. You repeat lines over and over, hours upon grueling hours, until they are etched into your mind. Your voice grows hoarse, your eyes tired, but the recitation continues, a constant, monotonous drone. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the dedication and desperation involved in early memorization is the practice of having young students literally chant the texts aloud, rhythmically, to aid memorization, often swaying their bodies back and forth in a repetitive motion. Some teachers even claimed this physical movement helped synchronize the body and mind, making recall more efficient. Imagine learning complex philosophical texts by chanting them like a song, rocking back and forth for hours, like a very focused, very nerdy rock band. Historians still argue whether this intense early memorization, by instilling a deep familiarity with classical texts, genuinely fostered profound intellectual understanding and ethical development in later life, or if its rigid emphasis on rote learning stifled creativity, critical thinking, and independent inquiry, leading to a generation of scholars who prioritized perfect recall over original thought. Did it build brilliance, or just compliance? Calligraphy is another relentless discipline. You spend countless hours practicing stroke order, brush control, and the aesthetic balance of characters. Your hand cramps, your fingers ache, but the precision is paramount. A single poorly formed character on an exam could mean failure. You learn to grind your own inkstone, mix the ink, and control the brush with exquisite precision, transforming legible writing into an art form in itself. Your life is largely solitary, isolated from the common world. While your siblings might be playing outside or helping with farm chores, you are confined to your study, your world shrinking to the characters on the page. Your only companion might be a stern tutor, often a scholar who himself failed the higher exams, whose own disappointment fuels his rigorous discipline of you. Physical punishment for mistakes or laziness is common. A sharp rap of a ruler on your knuckles, or a verbal chastisement that stings even more. The pressure is immense. Your family, especially your father, has invested heavily in your education, often sacrificing their own comfort and resources for your books, your paper, and your tutor's fees. Will delve into the financial burden soon. Section 3. You are their hope, their only chance for social advancement, for escaping the cycle of poverty and manual labor. Failure is not an option. It is a personal catastrophe, a betrayal of your family's dreams. You feel the burning in your eyes, the ache in your back, and the profound exhaustion that comes from relentlessly pushing your young mind. You trace another character with your brush, repeating an ancient phrase under your breath, knowing that every single one is a step towards an uncertain, high-stakes future. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about the grand exam halls, it's about the brutal reality of childhood rigor. Your early life is a tireless, isolating apprenticeship in unending discipline, transforming your youth into a relentless grind for intellectual mastery, ensuring that the path to power was paved with the lost innocence and immense pressure of countless young scholars, all dedicated to the long, arduous pursuit of an impossible dream. Even if your young mind adapted to the relentless rigor of childhood study, another formidable, often insurmountable barrier loomed over your scholarly aspirations. Financial burden, poverty's barrier. Forget the romantic notion of a peasant boy rising purely on intellect. The Imperial Chinese Examination System, despite its theoretical meritocracy, was astronomically expensive, demanding immense financial investment from families for tutors, books, paper, and living expenses, effectively shutting out the vast majority of impoverished households. You quickly learn that your talent, however brilliant, means little without a deep purse, and that the path to power is often paved with gold, not just genius. It's like being told you can win a scholarship to a prestigious university, but you have to pay for all your own tuition, books, and living expenses for 20 years. And if you fail, all that money is gone forever. You sit in your cramped study, the oil lamp sputtering, illuminating your worn books. Your stomach rumbles, a familiar ache, a reminder of the sacrifices being made. Your father, a farmer or a humble artisan, toils tirelessly in the fields or at his workbench, his back bent, his hands calloused. Your mother skimps on every meal, perhaps weaving extra cloth or taking on additional chores. Every penny saved, every comfort foregone, is an investment in you, their hope, their gamble on your future success. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters the idealized image of true meritocracy is that the Imperial Chinese Examination System, despite theoretically being open to all freeborn men, required decades of intense study, necessitating tutors, vast quantities of expensive books and paper, and living expenses for extended periods, placing an immense financial burden on families and effectively creating a significant barrier to entry for the poor, thus largely limiting access to the wealthier gentry class. Financial capacity, more than raw intelligence, often determined who could even attempt the exams. Think about it, a system designed to find talent, but only if that talent comes from a rich family. Imagine the costs. First, there's the tutor. While some village schools existed, serious preparation for the imperial exams often required a private tutor, a scholar who himself might have failed the higher exams, but whose knowledge was essential. His fees, whether paid in coin, grain, or services, were a significant drain on a peasant family's meager resources. If your family was truly poor, you might have to rely on the sporadic lessons from a sympathetic local scholar, or desperately try to teach yourself, a near impossible task given the complexity of the classical texts. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the lengths families went to for books which were incredibly expensive before printing became widespread. And even after is the practice of literally renting or borrowing books for a few days or weeks, then frantically copying them out by hand to create their own study materials. Imagine spending countless sleepless nights hand-copying thousands of characters from a borrowed textbook, knowing that every error could set you back years, all because you couldn't afford to buy your own copy. Historians still argue whether the extreme financial burden of the examination system, by forcing families to make enormous sacrifices and invest everything in a single son's education, inadvertently strengthened family bonds and fostered a deep sense of collective responsibility for scholarly achievement, or if it also created immense pressure on the student, guilt over family sacrifices, and profound disappointment for the vast majority who inevitably failed, contributing to social resentment and occasional rebellion. Did it create family unity or crushing despair? Then there are the materials paper, ink, and brushes. Paper, though invented in China, was still a relatively expensive commodity, especially the fine quality needed for examination essays. Ink sticks had to be ground from expensive soot and glue. Brushes, made from animal hair, wore out quickly with constant use. You needed vast quantities of all three for decades of practice and study. This was a constant, recurring expense that often pushed families further into debt. Beyond the direct educational costs, there were the living expenses. For the decades you spent studying, you were not contributing significantly to the family's labor, unlike your siblings, who might be toiling in the fields. Remember that from Section 2's Childhood Rigor. You were a consumer of resources, not a producer. A massive long-term investment that yielded no immediate returns. If you traveled to a larger town for more advanced tutoring, or to the provincial capital for the exams, the costs of travel and lodging for weeks at a time were immense, placing an even greater strain on your family's finances. The system, for all its talk of meritocracy, was fundamentally rigged against the poor. Only families with enough surplus wealth to support a non-productive son for decades, purchasing expensive resources and tutors, could genuinely compete. While individual rags-to-riches stories certainly existed, they were the rare exceptions, celebrated precisely because they defied the overwhelming financial barrier. You feel the profound weight of your family's sacrifices, the constant worry about money, and the chilling knowledge that your intellectual dreams are fundamentally limited by your family's meager purse. You watch your father toil, knowing his sweat is paying for your ink, and you feel the immense pressure not to waste his hard-won coin. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about the grand exam halls. It's about the brutal reality of its financial burden. Your education, your path to power, was fundamentally limited by poverty, transforming your scholarly dreams into a luxury few could ever truly afford. Ensuring that for millions, the path to intellectual advancement was perpetually blocked by an insurmountable wall of economic hardship, a silent, pervasive barrier to true meritocracy. Even if your family managed to scrape together the astronomical funds to support your scholarly ambitions, your mind itself faced a different kind of brutal, relentless assault. Memorization endless rote. Forget critical analysis, creative thinking, or even genuine intellectual curiosity. The Imperial Chinese Examination System demanded the verbatim memorization of vast, ancient classical texts, transforming your brain into a human library, tirelessly cataloging millions of characters and intricate commentaries. You quickly learn that your genius lies not in understanding, but in perfect recall, and that this crushing demand for rote learning will consume decades of your life, slowly dulling your spirit even as it sharpens your memory. It's like being forced to download an entire ancient encyclopedia into your brain, but you have to do it manually, character by agonizing character, every single day, for years. You sit hunched over your desk, the oil lamp casting a dim, flickering light on your scroll. Your eyes ache, your head throbs, and your hand cramps from endless hours of writing member, that calligraphy from Section 2's Childhood Rigor. Before you lie the 5 classics. Wu Jing, the Book of Odes, Book of Documents, Book of Rites, Book of Changes, and the Spring and Autumn Annals, followed by the 4 books, Sishu, and then countless commentaries, histories, and philosophical treatises. These aren't just read, they are committed to memory. Every single character, every single phrase, every single nuance of their intricate meaning. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the pedagogical approach of the Imperial Examination System is that aspiring Chinese scholars spent decades engaged in the verbatim memorization of a vast corpus of Confucian classics, historical texts, and commentaries, requiring incredible feats of rote learning as the primary method of study, which aimed to instill moral principles and ensure cultural continuity. but often prioritized perfect recall over original thought or practical application. This relentless memorization was the bedrock of their entire education. Think about it. Your entire education is based on becoming a perfect human photocopy machine. Imagine the daily routine. You begin before dawn, chanting texts aloud, rhythmically, to aid memorization. You repeat lines over and over, hundreds, thousands of times, until the characters swim before your eyes and the words become a droning mantra. Your voice grows hoarse, your throat raw, but the recitation continues, a ceaseless attempt to embed the vast literary landscape into your mind. This method, while incredibly effective for recall, left little room for genuine understanding in the early stages, as comprehension often came much later, after the sheer volume of text had been internalized. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the extreme physical and mental effort involved in this rote learning is the practice of pecking the book. Some students, exhausted from endless memorization, would literally peck at the book with their fingers, or even their head, as if trying to physically absorb the knowledge or to keep themselves from falling asleep. Imagine seeing a scholar physically banging his head against a book, not out of frustration, but as a method to cram more words into his brain. Historians still argue whether the extreme emphasis on rote memorization in the Imperial Examination System, by ensuring a common cultural and textual foundation for all officials, inadvertently contributed to the remarkable stability and continuity of Chinese imperial governance over millennia, fostering a shared elite identity, or if it fundamentally stifled intellectual creativity, practical problem-solving skills, and scientific innovation, ultimately contributing to China's perceived stagnation in later centuries. Did it create stability or intellectual stagnation? Beyond recitation, you're also required to copy texts by hand, meticulously, hundreds of times. This practice, often done with exquisite calligraphy, not only reinforces memorization, but also hones your writing skills, which are crucial for the essay portion of the exams. Your hand cramps, your fingers ache, and your back protests from hours hunched over your desk. But the precision is paramount. A single misplaced stroke in a character could be considered a grave error on an exam paper. Your life is largely solitary, isolated from the common world. While your siblings might be playing outside or helping with farm chores if your family is still toiling to support you. From Section 3's Financial Burden, you are confined to your study, your world shrinking to the characters on the page and the endless pursuit of perfect recall. Your tutor, often a scholar who himself failed the higher exams, enforces ruthless discipline, ensuring no moment is wasted, no effort spared. The psychological toll is immense. The constant pressure to remember everything, the fear of forgetting a single character or phrase, the mental exhaustion that permeates your very being, all contribute to a profound sense of strain. Your dreams might be filled with swirling characters, endless passages, or the terrifying silence of a forgotten line. This isn't just about learning, it's about forcing your mind into an unnatural, relentless grind. You feel the burning in your eyes, the dull ache behind your temples, and the constant pressure to absorb more, always more. You trace another character with your brush, repeating an ancient phrase under your breath, knowing that every single one is a tiny step towards an uncertain, high-stakes future. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about the grand exam halls, it's about the brutal reality of endless rote memorization. Your intellectual journey is a tireless, isolating apprenticeship in demanding discipline, transforming your mind into a vast, meticulously organized repository of ancient texts, ensuring that the path to power was paved with the profound mental exhaustion, and often the silent despair, of millions of aspiring scholars, all dedicated to the long, agonizing pursuit of an impossible dream. After years, even decades, of brutal memorization and relentless study, the day finally arrives for the first major examination. But the setting for this crucible of knowledge is far from the quiet dignity of your study. It's the exam hall's squalid cells. Forget spacious, well-lit classrooms or comfortable desks. These were vast, impersonal compounds filled with thousands of tiny, claustrophobic, and utterly unsanitary booths, where aspiring scholars were locked away for days on end, enduring unimaginable discomfort, pervasive filth, and intense psychological pressure. You quickly learn that your intellectual prowess is only half the battle. The other half is surviving the physical and sensory assault of the examination environment itself. It's like being forced to take the most important test of your life inside a very small, very smelly, very dirty public restroom stall for 3 days straight, with no breaks. You arrive at the examination compound in the provincial capital, a massive, walled enclosure with thousands of tiny, identical structures. The sheer scale is intimidating, hinting at the vast numbers of candidates competing. The air is thick with the nervous energy of anticipation, mixed with the pervasive smells of dust, sweat, and the faint, unsettling odor of overcrowding. You're searched meticulously, your body and your belongings scrutinized for any hidden notes or forbidden items. Will delve into the brutal security and cheating methods later. But for now, know it's thorough. One mainstream historical fact that utterly shatters any romantic image of scholarly endeavor is that Imperial Chinese examination halls were notorious for their extremely cramped, unsanitary, and uncomfortable individual testing booths Gongyuan, where candidates were confined for up to 3 days with minimal provisions, leading to widespread illness, physical discomfort, and profound psychological distress as they endured the grueling examination process. The environment itself was designed to be a test of endurance as much as knowledge. Think about it. Your future depends on being able to write coherent essays while feeling like you're stuck in a very tiny, very dirty box for days. Imagine your cell. It's a tiny brick booth, perhaps just 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and 6 feet high. Inside, 2 planks of wood, one serving as a seat and the other as a desk, are all the furniture you get. There's no window, no natural light except through the small, open front of the booth, which exposes you to the elements. The walls are rough, often covered with graffiti from previous candidates, desperate pleas, crude jokes, or philosophical musings from centuries past. A grim testament to the countless souls who have endured this very spot. The conditions are unsanitary in the extreme. Each booth is equipped with a small, unemptied chamber pot, its contents contributing to the pervasive, stomach-churning stench that hangs over the entire compound. Flies buzz incessantly, drawn to the filth, landing on your paper, your hands, and your food. Water, if provided, is often lukewarm and of dubious quality. The air is stale, thick with dust, and the oppressive heat of a Chinese summer, or the biting cold of winter, seeps into your unheated cell. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the sheer physical discomfort is the sleeping arrangement. During the long, multi-day examinations, candidates were expected to sleep if they could hunched over their desks or curled up in the tiny space, often in uncomfortable positions. There's no bed, no bedding provided beyond perhaps a thin mat you brought yourself. Imagine trying to get any restful sleep while crammed into a tiny, smelly box, constantly battling discomfort and the gnawing anxiety of the exam. Historians still argue whether the extreme physical and psychological harshness of the examination halls was primarily an unavoidable consequence of managing thousands of candidates in an ancient imperial system, or if it was also a deliberate design choice intended to weed out candidates lacking physical endurance, mental fortitude, or genuine scholarly dedication, ensuring that only the absolute toughest survived the ordeal. Was it about efficiency or brutality that made the halls so squalid? The sounds of the exam hall are a unique kind of torture. The rhythmic scratching of thousands of brushes on paper, the occasional cough, the rustle of a turning page, the nervous sighs of desperate scholars, and then, the less welcome sounds, the buzzing of flies. The distant groans of a candidate succumbing to illness remember disease invisible killers from earlier lectures, or the muffled shouts of guards. There's no silence, no respite, just the constant pressure of your situation. You spend days locked in this tiny, squalid cell, meticulously writing your essays, composing your poetry, recalling every single character of those vast classical texts. Remember that endless rote memorization from Section 4. You eat your meager provisions, taste the dust, and feel the constant itch of unseen insects on your skin. Your body aches. Your mind swims in a fog of exhaustion and anxiety. You feel the claustrophobia pressing in on you, the suffocating stench, and the relentless pressure of time ticking away. You know that outside this cell, thousands of other candidates are enduring the exact same misery, all vying for the infinitesimally few spots available. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about the intellectual challenge, it's about the brutal reality of the exam halls. Your pursuit of knowledge transforms into a horrifying test of physical endurance and mental fortitude, forcing you to exist for days in a squalid, cramped cell, ensuring that the path to power was paved not just with brilliant minds, but with overwhelming human discomfort, disease, and silent suffering, a constant physical reminder of the brutal price of imperial ambition. Even amidst the squalid, suffocating confines of the exam halls, with the constant pressure to recall vast swathes of text, another, more illicit, battle was always being waged. Cheating desperate measures. Forget simple peeking at a neighbor's paper. The staggering difficulty of the Imperial Chinese examinations, combined with the immense rewards of success and the crushing consequences of failure, drove desperate candidates to employ incredibly elaborate, often ingenious, and sometimes horrifyingly brutal methods to cheat, risking their lives, their reputations, and their families' futures for a chance at an unfair advantage. You quickly learn that the pursuit of meritocracy had a dark underbelly, and that the integrity of the system was constantly under siege from those willing to risk everything to succeed. It's like being in a very high-stakes academic competition where people are literally trying to sneak entire textbooks into the exam, sometimes written on their own skin. And if caught, it means public disgrace and ruin. You sit in your tiny, cramped examination cell, your eyes burning from the oil lamp, your mind aching from endless memorization. You might glance at the rough, graffitied walls around you, some of them scrawled with desperate pleas or crude jokes, but others, contain tiny, almost invisible characters, a form of illicit assistance left by previous, desperate candidates. The pervasive atmosphere of anxiety, the knowledge of immense pressure, fueled this pervasive culture of cheating. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the lengths to which desperation could drive candidates is that despite extremely severe punishments for cheating, including public humiliation, exile, or even execution for serious offenses, elaborate and ingenious methods were commonly employed by candidates in the Imperial Chinese examinations, ranging from micro-written texts on clothing or body parts to hidden notes, bribing officials, or sending in substitutes. The intense pressure to pass made the risks of cheating seem worthwhile for many. Think about it, you'd literally write notes on your fingernails, risking your life, just to pass a test. Imagine the ingenuity. The most common method, and perhaps the most painstaking, involved micro-writing. Candidates would meticulously copy entire passages or even condensed versions of classical texts onto incredibly tiny pieces of silk, paper, or even rice grains, using a specialized, almost invisible script. These minuscule notes would then be concealed in the lining of their robes, sewn into their shoes, hidden in their hair or fingernails, or even swallowed and regurgitated. You might spend years practicing calligraphy, not just for essays, but to write notes so small they required extreme eyesight to read in the dim light of the cell. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the almost artistic level of some cheating attempts is the creation of entire cheat vests, or cheat underwear, garments meticulously covered on the inside with thousands of micro-written classical characters, allowing a candidate to wear the entire curriculum underneath their official examination robes. Imagine trying to subtly read an entire philosophical treatise from the inside of your underwear, without the guards noticing. Historians still argue whether the widespread prevalence and sophistication of cheating in the imperial examinations fundamentally undermined the system's claims of meritocracy, proving that wealth and cunning could often trump genuine intellectual ability, or if the draconian security measures which we'll discuss later. Section 10 and very low pass rates meant that successful cheating was incredibly rare, making it more of a desperate, often futile, act by the overwhelmed majority. Did cheating destroy meritocracy? Or was it just a desperate symptom of its brutality? Beyond physical notes, candidates resorted to other methods. Some would try to bribe minor officials or guards to smuggle in notes or to provide assistance. This was incredibly risky, as the penalties for corruption were severe for both parties. Others might try to send in a substitute, a more skilled scholar who would take the exam in their place. If caught, this was a capital offense for both the candidate and the substitute. A desperate gamble for those with immense family pressure. The security measures, implemented to prevent cheating, were draconian. Candidates were thoroughly searched, sometimes even cavity searched, before entering the exam halls. Their writing materials were inspected. Guards constantly patrolled the narrow alleys between the cells, listening for whispers or suspicious movements. Any caught cheaters faced immediate and brutal punishment, public humiliation, branding a permanent mark. Remember that from What Happened If You Were a Criminal in Medieval Times, Section 11, Exile, or even execution. The stakes were life and death, even for a single concealed note. You feel the constant tension, the gnawing anxiety of being under perpetual scrutiny. You see the desperate faces of your fellow candidates, some hunched over their desks, others perhaps subtly shifting their robes, hoping to sneak a glance at a concealed note. The temptation to cheat is immense, given the immense pressure and the devastating consequences of failure, which we'll explore later. Section 9. You struggle to recall a specific passage, your mind a blank, and you feel the desperate urge to pull out a concealed note, but the fear of discovery, of the brutal punishment that awaits, freezes your hand. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual rigor alone. It's about the brutal reality of cheating. Your path to power is constantly shadowed by the pervasive desperation that drives scholars to illicit attempts, making every exam not just a test of knowledge, but a high-stakes gamble against discovery, transforming the pursuit of meritocracy into a perilous dance with deception, and ensuring that the integrity of the empire's elite was constantly under siege from the cunning and desperation of its aspiring scholars. Even if your moral compass steered you clear of the desperate, illicit world of cheating, the very act of preparing for and undertaking the Imperial Chinese examinations inflicted another, more insidious, and utterly unavoidable torment upon your body. Physical toll. Exhaustion. Illness. Forget the temporary stress of modern exams, the relentless decades of intense study, the grueling confinement of the exam halls, and the constant pressure combine to create a profound and chronic state of physical debilitation, making illness and collapse not just possibilities, but near certainties for aspiring scholars. You quickly learn that the pursuit of intellectual glory comes at a devastating cost to your physical well-being, slowly, relentlessly, consuming your health even as it sharpens your mind. It's like running a marathon for 20 years, mostly in a chair, fueled by minimal sleep and maximum anxiety, and your body is slowly falling apart. You sit in your tiny examination cell, the air stale and heavy. Remember those squalid cells from Section 5, your body aching from days of confinement and endless writing. Your eyes burn, bloodshot from the dim oil lamp and the relentless focus on minuscule characters. Your back is a knot of pain from hours hunched over your desk, and your fingers cramp from holding the brush. This isn't just discomfort, it's a profound physical breakdown, a direct consequence of the extreme demands placed upon your body. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the physical suffering of scholars is that candidates for the Imperial Chinese examinations frequently suffered severe physical ailments, including chronic exhaustion, vision impairment, musculoskeletal problems, and rampant illnesses like dysentery and typhoid exacerbated by malnutrition, poor hygiene, and extreme stress, often leading to collapse, permanent disability, or death during the grueling multi-day exams. The physical demands were as brutal as the intellectual ones. Think about it. Passing this exam literally required you to survive a physical ordeal as well as an intellectual one. Imagine the pervasive exhaustion. Years of waking before dawn, studying late into the night. Remember childhood rigor from Section 2. With minimal sleep, accumulate into a profound, bone-deep fatigue that permeates your entire being. During the multi-day examinations, sleep is almost non-existent. You might snatch a few hours, hunched over your desk, but it's never enough, leaving you perpetually tired, your mind dulled, your movements sluggish. This exhaustion isn't just uncomfortable, it severely impairs your ability to concentrate, to remember facts, and to write coherently. Adding another layer of brutal pressure, a particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the grim reality of collapse is the historical records of candidates literally dying in their examination cells from exhaustion, heat stroke in summer exams, or severe illness. Their bodies would sometimes remain slumped over their desks, undiscovered until the end of the examination period, a chilling testament to the brutal demands of the system. Imagine being found dead in your exam booth, simply because you literally studied yourself to death, or your body just couldn't take the conditions anymore. Historians still argue whether the extreme physical toll and high mortality rates among examination candidates were primarily an unavoidable consequence of the scale and difficulty of the imperial examination system. where such prolonged confinement and intellectual stress naturally broke down weaker individuals, or if it was also a deliberate, albeit unspoken, policy of the imperial state, effectively weeding out candidates who lacked the ultimate physical and mental fortitude deemed necessary for a rigorous bureaucratic career. Did it simply happen, or was it a form of intentional attrition? Beyond exhaustion, illness was rampant. The unsanitary conditions of the exam halls, remember those squalid cells from Section 5, with their open chamber pots and lack of clean water, created perfect breeding grounds for diseases. Dysentery and typhoid fever were common, causing agonizing stomach cramps, relentless diarrhea, and rapid dehydration, debilitating candidates during the crucial examination days. Respiratory illnesses, exacerbated by stale air and extreme temperatures, were also prevalent. Your diet, even if your family could afford a tutor, might not be balanced. And during the exam, provisions were minimal, often just a few steamed buns and water. Malnutrition, combined with extreme stress, further weakened your immune system, making you highly susceptible to any infection. You might see fellow candidates coughing violently, struggling for breath, or collapsing in their cells, their bodies racked with fever, knowing that the same invisible killers are constantly stalking you. The psychological pressure, which we'll explore in the next section, undoubtedly exacerbated these physical ailments, creating a vicious cycle where mental stress manifested as physical symptoms, and physical discomfort further strained your mental faculties. The knowledge that decades of effort and your family's immense financial sacrifices from Section 3 hinged on your performance pushed your body and mind to their absolute breaking point. You feel the burning behind your eyes, the constant ache in your joints, and the profound, bone-deep exhaustion that seems to consume your very being. You try to focus on the characters on your paper, but your vision blurs, your hand trembles, and your mind struggles against the fog of fatigue. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual prowess alone. It's about the brutal reality of its physical toll. Your pursuit of power transforms into a horrifying battle against your own body. Slowly, relentlessly, consuming your health, ensuring that the path to imperial glory was paved not just with brilliant minds, but with overwhelming physical suffering, rampant illness, and countless silent collapses. A grim reminder of the profound biological cost of a life dedicated to an impossible dream. Even if your body somehow miraculously endured the chronic exhaustion and debilitating illnesses brought on by years of brutal study, your mind faced an even more insidious and utterly terrifying threat: psychological pressure. Madness's edge. Forget mere exam stress. The relentless demands of rote memorization, the crushing financial burden on your family, the knowledge of staggeringly low pass rates, and the profound isolation combined to create an unimaginable mental strain, pushing countless aspiring scholars to the brink of despair, breakdown, or even madness. You quickly learn that your greatest battle isn't with the texts, but with your own mind, and that the pursuit of intellectual glory can exact a devastating toll on your sanity, turning ambition into a terrifying descent into mental torment. It's like being trapped in a never-ending, extremely high-stakes psychological thriller, where the antagonist is your own ambition, and the prize for failing is utter mental collapse. You sit in your tiny, squalid examination cell, the flickering oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows that seem to twist into mocking faces on the rough walls. Remember those squalid cells from Section 5. Your eyes burn, your head throbs, and your mind feels like a stretched, brittle string, constantly on the verge of snapping. You try to focus on the intricate characters of your essay. To recall that specific passage from the Book of Rites, remember those vast classical texts from Section 4's endless rote memorization. But your thoughts are a swirling vortex of anxiety, self-doubt, and the terrifying fear of failure. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the psychological brutality of the examination system is that the immense, decades-long psychological pressure of the Imperial Chinese Examination System, coupled with isolation, sleep deprivation, and the crushing social and financial consequences of failure, frequently led to severe mental health issues among candidates, including nervous breakdowns, depression, anxiety, and even outright madness, with some scholars never recovering. The emotional and mental toll was immense, leaving countless individuals psychologically scarred or utterly broken. Think about it. A single exam could literally drive you insane. Imagine the relentless pressure from your family. They've invested everything in you, sacrificed their own comfort and resources. Remember that financial burden. Poverty's barrier from Section 3. Their hopes, their future, their very honor, rest entirely on your success. You carry the weight of their expectations like a physical burden, a constant whisper of, "Don't fail us," that echoes in your mind, amplifying every mistake, every moment of self-doubt. The thought of bringing them shame, of wasting their sacrifices, is a crushing weight that makes every error feel catastrophic. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the extreme mental state of some scholars and the desperate measures taken by others is the widespread practice of seeking out lucky charms or engaging in superstitious rituals before and during the exams, such as copying out auspicious characters, visiting temples for blessings, or avoiding certain unlucky foods, hoping to ward off bad fortune and calm their fraying nerves. Imagine believing that rubbing a particular stone or chanting a specific phrase could be the difference between passing and going mad in your exam cell. Because you've exhausted all rational coping mechanisms. Historians still argue whether the extreme psychological pressure of the examination system, by forcing scholars to push their mental limits under intense duress, inadvertently contributed to the development of exceptional intellectual discipline and mental resilience among the successful few, making them uniquely suited for high-pressure bureaucratic roles, or if it primarily created a vast pool of mentally broken individuals who ultimately contributed little to society, showcasing the system's profound human cost. Did it forge resilience, or just break spirits? The isolation of your study, remember, childhood rigor. Section 2 and the decades of solitary study and the confinement of the exam halls only exacerbate the mental strain. You're alone with your thoughts, your anxieties, and the relentless ticking away of the exam hours. Sleep deprivation makes your mind foggy, prone to errors, and susceptible to hallucinations or terrifying delusions. You might find yourself staring at the blank paper, unable to recall a single character, your mind utterly frozen by the overwhelming pressure, slipping towards a terrifying void of mental exhaustion. The fear of failure is profound. It doesn't just mean personal disappointment, it means public disgrace, the ruin of your family's hopes, and a life condemned to obscurity or, for some, to a return to grueling manual labor that your pampered scholarly body is ill-equipped to handle. You might see a fellow candidate collapse in his cell, not from physical illness, but from a sudden, terrifying nervous breakdown. His mind utterly consumed by the pressure, reduced to incoherent babbling or catatonic silence. These are the exam madmen. Common sights around the examination compounds. You feel the relentless pounding in your temples, the swirling chaos in your thoughts, and the terrifying sensation of your mind teetering on the edge of comprehension. You try to calm your racing heart, to force your brain to recall. But the harder you try, the more elusive the answers become. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual prowess alone. It's about the brutal reality of its psychological pressure. Your pursuit of power transforms into a horrifying battle for your own sanity, systematically pushing your mind to the brink of breakdown, ensuring that the path to imperial glory was paved not just with brilliant minds, but with overwhelming mental anguish, profound despair, and countless silent descents into madness. A grim reminder of the inner cost of an impossible dream, even if your mind, miraculously, somehow resisted the immense psychological pressure and you avoided the brink of madness. Your journey through the Imperial Chinese Examination System still held one of its most common and utterly devastating realities. Failure stigma, ruined life. Forget gentle redirection or second chances. For the vast majority of aspiring scholars, not passing the exams meant not just personal disappointment, but profound public humiliation, social ostracism, and the crushing destruction of your entire future, often condemning you and your family to a life of despair and shattered dreams. You quickly learn that for everyone who succeeded, thousands were permanently broken, and that the only path out of this misery was often a desperate, futile pursuit of redemption until your dying breath. It's like being told your entire life's purpose is to win a lottery, and if you don't, you lose everything, and everyone knows it. You emerge from the examination compound. Perhaps after enduring the squalid cells, remember Section 5, your body aching, your mind a fog of exhaustion. The results are posted, usually a vast list of names, meticulously ranked. You scan the names, your heart pounding, a desperate flicker of hope in your chest, and then you don't find it. Your name is not there. You have failed. The realization crashes over you like a cold wave, a profound, sickening sense of despair that instantly washes away the years of study, the sacrifices, the dreams. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the devastating impact of the examination system is that the vast majority of candidates, often over 99% for the Imperial Chinese examinations, consistently failed to achieve a passing rank, leading to widespread personal despair, severe social stigma for the individual and their family, a lack of alternative career paths for the educated, and often a lifelong cycle of retaking exams in a futile pursuit of success. Failure was the overwhelming norm, not the exception. Think about it, almost everyone who tried failed and paid a terrible price for it. Imagine the walk home, the subtle glances, the hushed whispers, the averted gazes from neighbors who once looked at you with hope. Your failure is not just personal, it's public. It's a profound humiliation that affects your entire family, who have sacrificed so much for your education. Remember that financial burden from Section 3, their investment, their hopes, their future, all are shattered by your inability to pass. The shame is immense, a crushing weight that makes you want to disappear. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the extreme desperation of repeat failures is the phenomenon of professional candidates, or exam ghosts. These were elderly scholars who had spent their entire lives repeatedly attempting the examinations, sometimes well into their 70s or 80s, never passing, but unable to give up the pursuit, their lives consumed by a futile quest for success. Imagine spending your entire life studying for a test you never pass, and everyone knows it. Yet you can't stop trying because it's the only thing you know. Historians still argue whether the extreme shame and devastating social consequences of examination failure in Imperial China. By highlighting the individual's perceived intellectual or moral inadequacy, inadvertently contributed to the system's longevity by reinforcing the absolute authority and perceived perfection of the imperial state as the system itself was seen as infallible, or if it created a vast pool of disenfranchised, bitter intellectuals who occasionally fueled social unrest and rebellion. Did it maintain order, or sow resentment? That failure was so brutal, your future, once filled with the promise of officialdom, is now a terrifying blank. What will you do? Your rigorous classical education, while extensive, has not prepared you for practical trades like farming or commerce. Your body, accustomed to the scholar's sedentary life, is ill-suited for manual labor. You are overeducated for common work, yet unqualified for the only respected profession. This leaves you in a profound limbo, a scholar without an office, a tragic figure in Chinese society. Some might resort to teaching, becoming a tutor for the next generation of aspiring scholars, a grim irony. Others might try to make a living as scribes or clerks, using their literacy for humble tasks. Many, however, simply lived in quiet despair, their lives consumed by a futile hope, clinging to the slim chance of passing a future exam, often trying repeatedly for decades, until age or illness finally forced them to give up the impossible dream. The years of study, rather than opening doors, have effectively closed them to any alternative path. The psychological toll, remember that madness's edge from Section 8 of repeated failure is immense. Depression, anxiety, and profound despair are common companions. The sense of personal inadequacy, of having failed your family and ancestors, can be overwhelming. Some would succumb to illness, or even suicide, unable to bear the burden of their ruined lives. You feel the cold weight of your failure, the profound shame that burns in your gut, and the terrifying realization that your entire life and your family's sacrifices have been for naught. You try to imagine a different path, a different future, but your mind is too exhausted, too consumed by the bitterness of defeat. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual rigor alone. It's about the brutal reality of failure. Your life is consumed by a devastating cycle of dashed hopes, public humiliation, and profound social stigma, ensuring that for millions, the path to power was paved with overwhelming personal ruin. A chilling and ubiquitous testament to the heavy price of imperial ambition, where the dream of meritocracy often ended in a lifelong nightmare of unfulfilled potential. Even after experiencing the soul-crushing despair of examination failure, you must understand that the system itself, driven by the desire for integrity and the immense stakes involved, constantly imposed a level of terrifying control over its candidates. This brings us to security-unyielding vigilance. Forget casual proctoring or a few cameras. The Imperial Chinese Examination System employed draconian, often humiliating, measures to prevent fraud, transforming the examination halls into impregnable fortresses of suspicion, where every candidate was treated as a potential cheater, and the slightest deviation from protocol could lead to brutal consequences. You quickly learn that your intellectual honesty is not assumed, but policed with an iron fist, and that the integrity of the system is maintained through a pervasive atmosphere of fear and constant surveillance. It's like taking the most important test of your life in a maximum security prison, where the guards are everywhere, and every move you make is scrutinized for signs of illicit activity. You prepare to enter the examination compound once more, Perhaps for another attempt after a previous failure, remember that devastating reality from Section 9. The atmosphere outside the gates is tense, thick with the anxiety of thousands of candidates, but also with the palpable presence of imperial authority. Guards stand at every entrance, their faces grim and unyielding. You know what awaits you: a meticulous, invasive process designed to strip you of any means of cheating, turning you into a blank slate, utterly dependent on your memory alone. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the extreme lengths to which the imperial state went to ensure fairness is that the Imperial Chinese Examination System implemented draconian security measures to prevent cheating, including thorough body searches, often humiliating and invasive, strict protocols for entry and exit, meticulous monitoring of candidates within their individual cells, and severe punishments from branding to execution for any attempts at fraud. Reflecting the immense importance placed on the integrity of the examination process. The state saw cheating as a direct threat to its meritocratic ideals and its own stability. Think about it: an entire government system built around preventing cheating at all costs. Imagine the search process. You would be stripped of your outer robes, your hair meticulously checked for hidden notes, and your body thoroughly patted down. Sometimes, even more invasive searches were conducted, leaving you feeling utterly dehumanized. Your writing materials, brushes, inkstone, paper, would be inspected with extreme scrutiny. Ink might be provided by the examination hall itself to prevent pre-prepared notes in solid ink. You would be given plain, stamped paper, ensuring no external marks could be used as codes. Any suspicious item, however small, could lead to your immediate disqualification, or worse. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the almost paranoid level of security is the use of unique, often changing, seals and stamps on the examination papers themselves, and the meticulous process of copying papers. Once a candidate wrote their answers, their paper would be recopied by scribes in a different hand, and numbers were used instead of names to identify candidates, preventing examiners from recognizing handwriting or showing bias, which we'll explore in the next section. Section 11 with examiners. Imagine spending days writing your life's work, only for it to be completely rewritten by someone else before grading, just to prevent bias, and you're identified only by a number. Historians still argue whether these draconian security measures, despite their brutality and cost, genuinely fostered a more objective and meritocratic selection process for officials, ensuring that only true knowledge prevailed, or if they primarily created a climate of fear and conformity. Punishing minor infractions severely while ultimately failing to eliminate all forms of high-level corruption or insider cheating, which we'll see later in Section 14 with Corruption Bribery's Shadow. Did it truly ensure fairness, or just create more ways to fail? Once inside the compound, you are escorted to your tiny, squalid cell. Remember those from Section 5. The gate clangs shut behind you, locking you in for the next 3 days. Guards constantly patrol the narrow alleys between the cells, their footsteps echoing, their eyes sharp. They listen for whispers, for suspicious sounds, for any deviation from the rhythmic scratching of brushes on paper. The silence of the vast compound is often broken by their shouts of warning, or the frantic cries of a candidate caught in a transgression. Any attempt to cheat, however minor, was met with severe and immediate punishment. A hidden note, a whispered word, a surreptitious glance at a neighbor's cell, all could lead to your disqualification from the examination. A public branding recall those bodies branding marks from Section 11 of What Happened If You Were a Criminal in Medieval Times. Exile or even for serious or repeated offenses. Execution recall that grim finality from Section 12 of the criminal script. The stakes were unimaginably high, and the system showed no mercy. The atmosphere inside the exam hall is one of suffocating pressure and pervasive suspicion. You are not just battling your own memory and intellectual limits. You are battling the constant vigilance of the guards, the possibility of being falsely accused, and the knowledge that a single moment of weakness could lead to your utter ruin. Your nerves are frayed, your mind constantly on edge, always aware of the eyes watching you. You feel the cold dread of omnipresent surveillance, the pressure to conform, and the chilling knowledge that your integrity is not assumed, but rigorously, brutally enforced. You carefully grind your ink, pick up your brush, and begin to write. Every stroke a desperate testament to your years of study. Under the unyielding gaze of the Imperial Examination System. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual brilliance alone. It's about the brutal reality of its security. Your pursuit of power transforms into a horrifying test of endurance under constant, unyielding vigilance, ensuring that the integrity of the empire's meritocracy was enforced by an iron fist, turning every scholar into a suspect, and every exam into a terrifying, isolated ordeal where freedom was minimal and a slip meant ruin. Even as you, the candidate, endure the suffocating squalor and unyielding vigilance of the exam halls, another group of individuals, seemingly powerful, faced their own unique and intense pressures. Examiner secrecy, isolation. Forget simple grading and anonymous submissions. The Imperial examination officials, tasked with the monumental responsibility of grading thousands of anonymous papers and upholding the system's integrity, were subjected to extreme isolation, intense scrutiny, and the constant threat of severe punishment for any perceived bias or corruption. You quickly learn that even those at the apex of this meritocratic system were prisoners of its brutal demands, their lives consumed by the relentless pressure to be perfectly impartial, knowing that one wrong judgment could lead to their own ruin. It's like being forced to grade thousands of papers in a windowless bunker, knowing that if you make a single biased mark, your career, and perhaps your life, is over. You find yourself, as an examiner, in a secluded compound adjacent to the vast examination halls, far from the outside world. The air is tense, filled with the rustle of papyrus and the hushed movements of other officials. You have been meticulously vetted for your integrity and scholarly knowledge, and now you are effectively a prisoner. Your every action, your every interaction is monitored. For the purity of the examination system rests squarely on your shoulders. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the unique burden of examiners is that Imperial Chinese examination examiners were subjected to rigorous isolation, often confined to special compounds for weeks during the grading period, and their identities were kept secret from candidates to prevent bribery and bias, with any perceived unfairness or corruption leading to severe punishments, including demotion, exile, or even execution. Their impartiality was paramount to the system's legitimacy. Think about it. Your job involves literally disappearing from society just to grade some tests, and any perceived mistake could cost you everything. Imagine the isolation. From the moment you enter the compound, you're cut off from your family, your friends, and the outside world. No letters in, no letters out, no contact with anyone outside the small circle of fellow examiners and trusted Imperial guards. This intense isolation, lasting for weeks during the grading period, was designed to prevent any attempts at bribery, lobbying, or influence from powerful families whose sons were taking the exams. You are a disembodied I, a pure intellect, judging papers without external interference. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the extreme measures taken to ensure impartiality and the examiner's unique burden is the practice of copying exam papers. Before examiners ever saw them, candidates' original papers were meticulously recopied by scribes in a different hand. Of course, to prevent handwriting recognition and identified only by a number, not a name. Then, the copied papers were covered with a new layer of paper, so only the numbered columns were visible, making it impossible for the examiner to even identify the candidate's handwriting or status. Imagine having to grade thousands of essays, knowing that they've all been rewritten by anonymous scribes, and you only know them by a number, all just to prevent you from being biased. Historians still argue whether the extreme measures of examiner isolation and paper recopying, despite their logistical complexity and cost, truly ensured a perfectly objective and meritocratic grading process, eliminating all forms of corruption and bias from the system, or if more subtle forms of influence like general knowledge of a powerful family's candidate, or specific hidden codes could still occasionally bypass these draconian controls. Did it prevent all bias, or just the obvious kind? Your task is immense, grading thousands of complex essays, poems, and classical interpretations. Each paper is a culmination of decades of a scholar's life, and your judgment holds immense power over their future. Remember that failure stigma ruined life. From Section 9, the pressure to be absolutely fair, perfectly objective, and unerringly accurate in your assessment is immense. A single mistake, a perceived act of favoritism or undue harshness, could lead to accusations against you. The mental strain is profound. You're reading for hours, days, meticulously scrutinizing every character, every brushstroke even though it's been recopied, every argument. Your eyes burn, your mind strains against the monotony, and the sheer volume of work. Sleep is minimal. Food is adequate but uninspired, and the only constant is the endless stack of papers waiting for your discerning eye. The risks are severe. Any accusation of corruption, of accepting bribes, or of showing favoritism would be investigated with extreme prejudice. If found guilty, the punishments were brutal demotion. Exile, remember that grim fate from Joseon Korea. Section 6 and What Happened If You Were a Criminal. Section 13, Confiscation of Property, or even execution. The very integrity of the Imperial Examination System rested on your perceived incorruptibility, and failure to maintain it meant catastrophic personal ruin. You feel the overwhelming pressure of judgment, the constant threat of suspicion, and the profound isolation that defines your crucial role. You pick up another paper, its anonymous script a testament to a scholar's hopes and fears, and you know that your judgment will seal his fate, while also determining your own precarious place in the imperial system. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about the candidates alone. It's about the brutal reality of the examiners. Your life is a continuous test of integrity under immense pressure, transforming your scholarship into a lonely, dangerous, and utterly vital duty, ensuring that the purity of the empire's meritocracy was enforced by a hidden, self-sacrificing elite, forever haunted by the immense weight of their anonymous, isolating, and often dangerous power. Even if the rigorous impartiality of the examiners didn't deter you, the sheer time commitment required for success in the Imperial Chinese Examination System imposed another, almost unimaginable, burden the long journey years of study. Forget a few years of college or a brief period of intense preparation. The path to becoming an imperial official demanded decades of unwavering dedication. A lifelong pursuit that began in early childhood and consumed your youth, your prime, and often your entire adult life. You quickly learn that intellectual mastery here is not a sprint, but an agonizing, relentless marathon, and that your life is a continuous cycle of reading, memorizing, and writing, with no guarantee of ever reaching the finish line. It's like being a permanent student, where your graduation is a highly unlikely event, and your entire existence is defined by the contents of ancient books. You look back on your childhood. You were pulled from the fields or games at a tender age, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. Remember that childhood rigor from Section 2, and thrust into the isolating world of classical texts. Your peers might have been learning a trade or starting a family, but you were hunched over an inkstone, meticulously copying characters. Recall that endless rote memorization from Section 4. This was not a temporary phase. It was the beginning of a lifelong commitment, a path from which there was almost no turning back. Given your family's immense financial sacrifices from Section 3's financial burden, one mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the extraordinary duration of this pursuit is that aspiring scholars often spent 20 to 30 years, or even more, studying for and repeatedly attempting the various levels of the Imperial Chinese Examinations, making the pursuit of officialdom a lifelong endeavor that consumed the vast majority of their productive years, with very few achieving success at a young age. This decades-long dedication was a defining characteristic of the examination system, shaping entire lives. Think about it. You spend more time studying for a test than most people spend on their entire careers. Imagine the sheer monotony. Day after day, year after year, the same classical texts, the same commentaries, the same endless practice of calligraphy and essay writing. You read them until the characters swim before your eyes, recite them until your voice is hoarse, and copy them until your hand cramps. The intellectual content, while profound, becomes dulled by endless repetition. Your mind is a repository of ancient wisdom, but it's also a landscape of profound boredom and mental fatigue. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the extreme devotion to study and the desperate hope for success is the existence of scholars who would build study huts or scholars' huts in remote, isolated locations, away from all distractions, where they would live as hermits for years, dedicating themselves entirely to their books. Imagine willingly exiling yourself to a tiny, isolated cabin for a decade, with nothing but your texts for company, all to prepare for a multi-day exam. Historians still argue whether the extreme length of study required for the Imperial Examination System genuinely fostered a deep, internalized understanding of Confucian ethics and effective governance in the successful candidates, preparing them for lifelong service, or if it primarily led to widespread intellectual exhaustion, burnout, and a focus on superficial memorization rather than creative problem-solving, inadvertently making successful candidates highly conventional and resistant to innovation in later bureaucratic roles. Did it create wisdom or just exhaustion? Your physical health, recall that physical toll exhaustion, illness, from Section 7 would suffer immensely over these decades. Years of sedentary study, often with poor lighting, would lead to chronic back pain, vision problems, and a general decline in physical fitness. The constant mental strain would take its toll, pushing you to the brink of psychological breakdown. Remember madness's edge from Section 8, a constant threat looming over your prolonged efforts. Socially, the long journey of study often meant immense isolation. While your peers might marry, raise families, and build lives. You're often unmarried, or your family is a distant memory, sacrificed for your pursuit. Your interactions are primarily with your tutor, fellow scholars who are also your intense rivals, and the occasional visit from your family, who constantly remind you of their financial sacrifices and their expectations. Your world shrinks to your books, your study, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, leaving you profoundly disconnected from broader society. The emotional burden is crushing. You face repeated failures. Remember that stigma ruined life from Section 9. Each failed attempt means another 3 years of study, another period of intense pressure, another drain on your family's dwindling resources. You see younger scholars surpass you, or older scholars still trying, their faces etched with the grim despair of a lifelong, futile pursuit. The hope, once a burning flame, slowly dwindles, replaced by a grim determination born of sheer stubbornness and the inability to give up. You feel the weight of countless dusty scrolls, the aching weariness in your bones, and the profound realization that your entire existence is a gamble on a single, elusive triumph. You trace another character, repeating an ancient passage, knowing that decades have passed since you began this brutal journey. And still, the path stretches endlessly before you. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual brilliance alone. It's about the brutal reality of its long journey of study. Your pursuit of power transforms into a terrifying, lifelong odyssey of relentless rote learning, immense physical and psychological toll, and pervasive social isolation, ensuring that the path to imperial glory was paved with the profound exhaustion, dashed hopes, and countless decades of unfulfilled potential, a chilling testament to the human cost of an impossible dream. After enduring decades of relentless study, weathering the crushing financial burdens, and surviving the physical and psychological toll of a scholar's life, your journey towards officialdom finally forces you to confront the escalating, brutal reality of the 3 levels progressive grind. Forget a single, decisive test. The Imperial Chinese Examination System was a multi-tiered gauntlet, a series of increasingly difficult and exclusive examinations, each demanding greater mastery, endurance, and luck, with each successive stage shedding thousands of hopefuls and pushing you closer to either immense glory or utter, final ruin. You quickly learn that success at one level only grants you the privilege to attempt an even harder, more grueling challenge, turning your entire pursuit into a never-ending uphill battle where the air gets thinner and the stakes get higher with every step. It's like climbing a very tall, very slippery, and very deadly mountain, knowing that every single false step, at any altitude, means a catastrophic fall. You have finally passed the first hurdle, the local prefectural and preliminary qualifying exams, often called Tongxi. Perhaps after several attempts and years of study, your name finally appeared on that list. This grants you the lowest scholarly degree, the Shengyuan, or licentiate. You are now a recognized scholar, exempt from certain manual labor, and treated with some respect in your local community. But this is merely the antechamber to true power. The real tests lie ahead. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the escalating difficulty and exclusivity of the examination system is that the Imperial Chinese Examination System comprised 3 primary, progressively difficult levels: the prefectural, preliminary exams, followed by the provincial jurin exams held every 3 years, and finally the metropolitan jinshi exams held in the capital, with each successive stage having drastically lower pass rates. GG. from 1% at provincial to even lower at metropolitan, creating an incredibly competitive and arduous progression. The higher you went, the fewer survived. Think about it. Passing one brutal exam only guarantees you the right to fail an even more brutal one. Imagine preparing for the provincial examination jurin. This exam was held every 3 years in the provincial capital, attracting thousands of candidates from across the province. The questions were far more complex, requiring not just memorization. Remember that endless rote from Section 4, but sophisticated essay composition, detailed commentaries on classical texts, and an understanding of statecraft. You would spend weeks, or months, traveling to the provincial capital, a journey itself, with its own miseries, similar to why travel sucked on the Roman roads. Section 2. The exam halls, those squalid cells from Section 5, would be even larger, more crowded, and just as unsanitary. Intensifying the physical and psychological pressure, remember Section 7 and 8. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the overwhelming competitiveness of the provincial exam is that in some periods, thousands of candidates from a single province might sit for this exam, but only a few dozen would pass. This led to a desperate, often superstitious, atmosphere. Imagine being one of 10,000 people taking a test, and only 50 will pass, turning the exam hall into a pressure cooker where everyone knows the odds are astronomically against them. Historians still argue whether the extreme competitiveness of the higher examination levels, by relentlessly pushing candidates to their intellectual and physical limits, inadvertently encouraged a highly innovative and adaptive form of self-study and pedagogical methods like mnemonic techniques or specialized tutors, or if it primarily led to widespread despair. Intellectual conformity as candidates focused on pleasing examiners rather than original thought, and a vast pool of highly educated but deeply frustrated failures. Remember that stigma ruined life. From Section 9. Did it foster genius or just burnout? If, by some miracle, you passed the provincial examination, you earned the jurin degree. This was a significant achievement, granting you moderate status, potentially a minor official position, and the right to attempt the final, most prestigious level. The celebrations would be immense, a brief, glorious respite from decades of toil. But the path wasn't over. The ultimate goal was the Metropolitan Examination Jinshi, held in the imperial capital, usually within a year of the provincial exam. This was the pinnacle, attracting the jurin degree holders from across the entire empire, a selection of the very best scholars, perhaps a few thousand in total. The difficulty was exponential. The questions were even more abstract, the essays more nuanced, demanding not just perfect recall, but profound insight, elegant prose, and a deep understanding of governance. The pressure here was unimaginable. For a pass meant immediate entry into high officialdom, immense power, and unparalleled prestige for your family. The pass rate for the metropolitan exam was even lower than the provincial, often less than 0.5% of all candidates who originally entered the system, and perhaps only 3 to 5% of those who made it to the metropolitan level. You were competing against the elite of the elite, knowing that almost all of them would fail. The final stage was sometimes an audience with the emperor himself, who might personally examine the top candidates, adding another layer of terrifying scrutiny. You feel the constant, escalating pressure, the physical and mental exhaustion from decades of study, culminating in these terrifying, impossible hurdles. You pass one, only to find the next is even steeper, the air thinner, the competition fiercer. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual brilliance alone. It's about the brutal reality of its three progressive levels. Your entire life is a relentless, escalating grind of increasingly difficult examinations, transforming the pursuit of power into a terrifying odyssey where each success only granted you the right to face an even more soul-crushing challenge, ensuring that the path to imperial glory was paved with the widespread failure, profound despair, and immense sacrifice of countless scholars, making true success an almost divine and utterly brutal exception. Even after navigating the brutally escalating difficulty of the three examination levels, a more insidious and pervasive force often cast a dark shadow over the system's claims of purity. Corruption bribery's shadow. Forget a truly level playing field. Despite draconian security measures and severe punishments, the immense stakes of the Imperial Chinese Examinations, combined with the power of wealth and the pervasive nature of human greed, meant that illicit payments, influence peddling, and outright bribery sometimes undermined the meritocratic ideal, allowing the less deserving to succeed and adding another layer of injustice to an already brutal system. You quickly learn that even in a system designed for fairness, money often found a way to talk, turning the noble pursuit of knowledge into a corrupt gamble. It's like being in a very high-stakes competition where a few players can secretly pay the referees, making all your hard work feel utterly worthless. You move through the world of scholarly pursuit, aware of the rumors that circulate in hushed tones a certain wealthy family whose sons always seem to pass, despite their questionable talent. A minor official who has suddenly acquired a lavish new estate. A whisper about a special connection to an examiner. These aren't just idle gossip. They are the telltale signs of the pervasive shadow of corruption, constantly threatening the integrity of the examination system. For those who toiled for decades in honest study, the knowledge that others might be buying their way to success was a bitter pill to swallow. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this insidious reality is that despite the rigorous security and severe penalties implemented to prevent it, corruption, including bribery of examiners or officials, the use of disguised proxy candidates, and illicit acquisition of exam questions was a persistent problem within the Imperial Chinese Examination System, often undermining its meritocratic ideals and leading to periodic scandals and purges. The immense value of an official position created powerful incentives for illicit dealings. Think about it, an entire government system designed for fairness, but constantly being challenged by those with enough money to cheat it. Imagine the methods. While extreme measures were taken to isolate examiners and anonymize papers, remember that unyielding vigilance from Section 10 and how examiners were kept in secrecy. Isolation from Section 11. Cunning individuals found ways. A high-ranking official with a son taking the exam might try to establish a secret code, perhaps a specific phrase or a subtle mark on the paper that only a bribed examiner would recognize. Or, more crudely, a desperate candidate might attempt to bribe a low-level guard to smuggle in a pre-written essay, a risky but tempting gamble. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the almost theatrical lengths of these corrupt schemes is the use of proxy candidates, or ghostwriters. A wealthy family might hire a brilliant but impoverished scholar to take the exam in their son's place, knowing that, if caught, both the imposter and the real candidate faced execution. Some proxy candidates were so skilled they even developed techniques to mimic the handwriting of their employers. Imagine hiring someone to take your college entrance exam for you, and they're so good they can perfectly forge your handwriting. But if caught, you both face a death sentence. Historians still argue whether the persistent problem of corruption and bribery fundamentally undermined the Imperial Examination System's ability to truly select the most capable officials, thereby contributing to the decline and weakness of later Chinese dynasties. Or if the system's sheer scale, complexity, and the relatively infrequent nature of successful, high-level corruption meant that it still largely functioned as a meritocratic system, selecting genuinely talented individuals despite its flaws. Did it ruin the system? Or was it just a minor flaw in an otherwise effective one? The discovery of cheating or bribery led to massive scandals and brutal purges. If an examiner was caught accepting a bribe, or a candidate was found with a concealed cheat sheet, the consequences were swift and severe. Officials could be demoted, exiled, or even executed. Recall those brutal justice realities from What Happened If You Were a Criminal in Medieval Times. Section 12. Candidates could be branded. Remember, mutilation bodies branding. Section 11 from the Criminal Script. Publicly humiliated. Section 9. Public humiliation. And permanently barred from ever taking the exams again, ruining their entire family's reputation. So remember, failure stigma, ruined life. Section 9. But worse. These brutal crackdowns were designed to send a chilling message, to uphold the system's perceived integrity. But they also highlight how pervasive the threat of corruption truly was. The very existence of such severe punishments for corruption speaks volumes about the constant battle the imperial state waged against this insidious problem. They knew it existed. They knew the temptation was immense, and they fought it with every means at their disposal, transforming the pursuit of knowledge into a perilous moral minefield. You feel the cold weight of knowing that some of your rivals might be cheating their way to success, undermining your honest efforts. You might hear whispers of a newly passed scholar whose family had no discernible talent, suddenly flaunting immense wealth. The injustice burns, a silent resentment in your gut, knowing that your decades of honest toil might be outmaneuvered by a mere bribe. The awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System isn't about intellectual rigor alone. It's about the brutal reality of corruption. Your noble pursuit of power is constantly shadowed by the pervasive influence of illicit payments and desperate fraud, transforming the meritocratic ideal into a constant battle against the morally compromised, ensuring that the path to imperial glory, for all its supposed fairness, was often tainted by the shadow of bribery and the bitter taste of injustice. After enduring the brutal childhood rigor, the crushing financial burdens, the relentless rote memorization, the squalid confines of the exam halls, the desperate measures of cheating, the severe physical toll of exhaustion and illness, the terrifying psychological pressure pushing you to madness, the devastating stigma of failure, the unyielding vigilance of security, the immense pressure and isolation of examiners, the decades-long journey of study through multiple grueling levels, and the insidious shadow of corruption, you finally emerge from our journey through the Imperial Chinese Examination System to confront its complex and enduring legacy, meritocracy's price. This colossal, brutal system, for all its profound human cost and inherent flaws, fundamentally shaped Chinese society for over 1,000 years, defining its elite, its governance, and its cultural values, leaving an indelible mark that continues to resonate today. You realize that the very concept of a merit-based society, while aspirational, came with an unimaginable price, paid by millions of aspiring scholars. It's like looking at a magnificent, enduring dam and realizing it was built by countless hands, and every single stone represents a life consumed, and a dream perhaps shattered. You reflect on the sheer scale of ambition and suffering. Millions of young boys, generation after generation, dedicated their entire lives to this singular pursuit, driven by the promise of power and prestige and the desperate hope of elevating their families. The system was designed to find talent, and in many ways, it succeeded, creating a stable, educated bureaucracy that governed China for centuries. Arguably, the longest-lasting imperial system in history. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this profound legacy is that the Imperial Chinese Examination System, despite its brutal competitiveness and immense human cost, created a highly centralized and remarkably stable meritocratic bureaucracy that governed China for over a millennium, fostering a common literati culture and providing a pathway, albeit narrow, for social mobility, profoundly shaping Chinese society, governance, and intellectual life. Its influence was pervasive, impacting everything from education to administration. Think about it, a single exam shaped an entire civilization for over 1,300 years. Imagine the positive impacts. The system theoretically broke down the old aristocratic power structures, though wealth remained a significant barrier. Remember Section 3's financial burden. It fostered a common intellectual culture across the vast empire, ensuring that officials shared a fundamental understanding of Confucian ethics, history, and governance. It provided a powerful incentive for literacy and learning, elevating the status of scholars. It allowed for some social mobility, however rare, inspiring millions with the dream of rising from humble origins to positions of power. A powerful, albeit often illusory, aspiration. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the deep integration of the examination system into daily life, even beyond the direct participants, is the prevalence of popular literature and plays that explicitly depicted the struggles, failures, and rare triumphs of examination candidates, often incorporating elements of humor, tragedy, and social commentary, making the examination saga a common and relatable theme in Chinese culture. Imagine a society where every popular TV show or novel is about the brutal realities of standardized testing, complete with tragic failures and occasional, miraculous successes. Historians still argue whether the long-term legacy of the imperial examination system ultimately led to China's stagnation in scientific and technological innovation compared to the West. By prioritizing rote memorization of classical texts and a conservative Confucian orthodoxy over empirical inquiry and practical skills, or if its very success in creating a stable, unified bureaucracy actually prevented more radical political or intellectual change, thus contributing to China's later difficulties in adapting to external pressures. Did it foster stability at the expense of innovation? Or was it simply too successful in what it was designed to do? However, as you vividly experienced, this colossal achievement came at an immense, often horrifying, human cost. The ruined lives of the vast majority who failed. Remember that stigma, ruined life. From Section 9. The psychological breakdowns, Section 8's madness's edge. The physical toll, Section 7's exhaustion, illness. The decades of isolated, brutal study, Section 12. And the pervasive corruption, Section 14. These were the unseen prices paid for imperial stability. The system was a relentless grinder of human potential, sacrificing millions for the sake of selecting a few. The legacy of the examination system is thus a paradoxical one. It was a beacon of meritocracy in an age of hereditary privilege, yet it was deeply unfair. It fostered intellectualism, yet it could stifle creativity. It created stability, yet it often consumed its own brightest minds. It was both the glory and the curse of imperial China. You stand now, perhaps with a newfound appreciation for your own educational opportunities and your ability to choose your own path. the awful truth about the Imperial Chinese Examination System, for all its historical significance, is precisely what makes its legacy so compelling. It is the brutal human cost behind its grand ideals, the silent suffering of millions of aspiring scholars that forever echoes in the halls of its enduring glory. Its existence is a powerful, complex reminder that even the most brilliant societal structures often come at an unimaginable personal price, etched into the very soul of a civilization. Now, as the inkstone fades into shadow and the whispers of ancient texts grow quiet, let the stillness of your room embrace you. The brutal studies, the squalid exam cells, the crushing failures, and the profound human cost of the Imperial Chinese Examination System are safely in the past, part of a history that now dissolves into the gentle hum of your fan. You've journeyed through a world where ambition came with an unbearable price, and now it's time for you to find your own peaceful rest. Let your mind unwind, your muscles relax, and sink into a deep, undisturbed sleep, far from the brutal pursuit of imperial glory. End of script. Sweet dreams.